Hi, I'm Chris Green, the History Chap, telling the fascinating, forgotten and sometimes unfashionable stories from history that we didn't learn about at school. And today I want to share with you the story of the only family to have ever been awarded 3 Victoria Crosses. Their service record is like a roll call of British Army actions in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. The Anglo-Sikh Wars, the Indian Mutiny, the Boer War, the First World War, along with some very much overlooked stories, such as the multinational occupation of Crete in the Mediterranean, the Curragh incident in Ireland, and the war in British Somaliland against the so-called Mad Mullah. This is the story of brothers Hugh and Charles Gough, and Charles's son John, the only family to have ever been awarded 3 Victoria Crosses. The surname Gough was already well known in Britain and British military circles by the time brothers Charles and Hugh Gough were born in the 1830s. Their great-uncle, Field Marshal Viscount Gough, was a Peninsular War veteran who would go on to command the British during the Anglo-Sikh Wars in India, and he'll reappear in our story later. The brothers were both born in India, where their father was a judge. Hugh was 18 months the junior, and in 1853 was commissioned in the 1st Bengal European Light Cavalry. When the Indian Mutiny, or Indian Revolt, broke out in 1857, Lieutenant Hugh Gough was attached to an irregular cavalry unit, Hodson's Horse. In 1857, he was surrounded and wounded in a battle with the enemy and would have been killed if it hadn't been for the brave actions of another officer who galloped to his rescue. Meanwhile, older brother Charles had also joined the East India Company Army a few years before Hugh. Commissioned in the 8th Bengal Cavalry, he served in the Second Anglo-Sikh War, where the British Army was successfully commanded by his great-uncle, Viscount Gough. By the time the Indian Mutiny broke out, 25-year-old Charles had been promoted to the rank of Major. Like his younger brother Hugh, he too transferred to Hodson's Horse. And it was with Hodson's Horse on the 15th of August 1857 that he saw a fellow officer wounded and surrounded by the enemy. Charles Gough spurred his horse forward. Killing 2 attackers, he grabbed the wounded man, pulled him over his saddle and rode to safety. The man he saved was his younger brother, Hugh. Hugh would recover from his wounds and return to active service. Just 2 days after his 24th birthday, he charged across a swamp to capture 2 enemy guns. As he took on 3 defenders, his turban was cut through by a sword. Nevertheless, he pressed home his attack and the guns were captured. Then at the end of February 1858, near Lucknow, he again led a cavalry charge to successfully capture enemy guns. On this occasion, whilst participating in a series of hand-to-hand fights, he was wounded in the leg by a musket ball. It was one of several near misses that he had that day, which included 2 horses being shot from beneath him, and a shot also passing through part of his helmet. At the end of the year, he was awarded the Victoria Cross. So, Victoria Cross number 1 for the Gough family, but there were 2 more to follow. 3 days after rescuing his brother, Charles had led a cavalry charge against another enemy position, cutting down 2 Sowars, or Indian cavalry, in hand-to-hand fighting. As 1858 began, the great revolt against the British that had swept through northern India was starting to turn in favour of the British, but the fighting remained vicious. By now, Gough had been transferred to the 5th Bengal European Cavalry. In a particularly nasty fight near Shumshabad on the 25th of January, Major Charles Gough was once more involved in a cavalry charge. Spotting the enemy commander, he forced his way through the throng and managed to drive his sword through the man. The force of his thrust left the sword deeply embedded in the stricken commander, and he couldn't get it out. Gough was forced to use his revolver to defend himself as the fighting swirled around him. Just 1 month later, and he was once again riding to the rescue of a fellow officer. This time it wasn't his brother, but Brevet Major Anson of the 9th Lancers. For all these actions, including the rescue of his brother, Charles Gough was also awarded a Victoria Cross in 1859. Despite being the older brother, his citation was nearly a year after Hugh's. Interestingly, both brothers' Indian regiments, Charles's 8th Bengal Cavalry and Hugh's Hodson's Horse, are still units in the modern Indian Army, the 3rd Cavalry Regiment and the 4th Horse respectively. And as an aside, the cavalry regiment that Charles Gough served with during the latter part of the Indian Revolt the 5th Bengal European Cavalry, was part of a forgotten little incident in Indian history. Now, you've heard of the Indian Mutiny, but have you heard of the White Indian Mutiny? At the end of the Sepoy Rebellion, the British government took over the running of India from the East India Company. And whilst local Indian troops simply transferred into the Indian Army, the European regiments from the old East India Company Army were transferred into the regular British Army. And some of those regiments mutinied, refusing the change in command and, more importantly, the change in service conditions. And one of the most vocal of those regiments in this mutiny were the 5th Bengal European Cavalry. In the end, the British government allowed those men who didn't want to transfer to be honourably discharged and given a free passage home. Charles Gough, however, was not part of that mutiny, having happily transferred into the Indian Army. And over the coming years, he would see active service in the brief war that the British fought with the Himalayan kingdom of Bhutan in the mid-1860s, before participating in the Second Anglo-Afghan War. In December 1879, he led the column that relieved Major General Frederick Roberts, who was besieged in the Sherpur cantonment just outside Kabul. For his services in this war, he was awarded the Order of the Bath, with its accompanying knighthood. Having held a series of commands back in India, he retired after a 47-year military career to Ireland in 1895. The Goughs were an Anglo-Irish family. General Sir Charles Gough died in County Tipperary in 1912. Meanwhile, Hugh also continued his military career in the Indian Army, transferring to the 12th Bengal Cavalry, which via several amalgamations is now the 3rd Horse Regiment of the Pakistani Army. He served in the Abyssinian campaign under General Sir Robert Napier. I'll cover this forgotten military campaign in Africa in a future talk, so please hit the subscribe button so you don't miss it. Rather like his older brother, Hugh also served in the Second Anglo-Afghan War. In August 1880, part of the British Army had suffered a defeat at the hands of the Afghans at the Battle of Maiwand. The defeated British retreated to Kandahar, where they were besieged. General Frederick Roberts was now ordered to march south from Kabul to rescue the garrison. He chose Hugh Gough to command the cavalry brigade, consisting of 3 Indian regiments plus the British 9th Queen's Royal Lancers. Roberts' relief expedition covered the 320 miles through the unforgiving Afghan terrain in just 20 days, with Gough's cavalry in the vanguard. In the ensuing Battle of Kandahar, fought on the 1st of September 1880, Roberts defeated the Afghans and lifted the siege. Gough's role in the successful campaign was acknowledged when he, like his brother, was created a Knight Commander of the Order of the Bath. Hugh Gough VC was promoted to full general in 1894 and retired 3 years later. Moving to London, he was appointed Keeper of the Jewel House at the Tower of London, a post that he retained until his death in 1909. Unlike his older brother, who was buried in Ireland, Hugh Gough was laid to rest in Kensal Green Cemetery in West London. He is one of 17 Victoria Cross holders buried at the cemetery. Hugh and Charles Gough were the first brothers ever to be awarded the Victoria Cross, which is a pretty impressive family story. But it gets even better than that, because the Gough family can boast a 3rd VC. It was awarded to Charles Gough's son, John. John Gough was born in October 1871, and with a family like his, there really was only one career option open to him. The only surprise was that he'd actually joined the regular British Army rather than the Indian Army. In 1892, Johnny, as he was known to his friends, was commissioned as an officer in the Rifle Brigade. He was to serve in Kitchener's invasion of Sudan at the end of the decade, before joining the multinational occupation of the island of Crete. Now, this is another one of those forgotten stories from history. For the previous 300 years, the predominantly Greek island of Crete had been part of the Ottoman Empire. Rising tensions on the island brought Greece and the Ottomans to the verge of war, and this threatened the balance of power in Eastern Europe and the Middle East. A joint naval force drawn from the great powers of Germany, France, Austro-Hungary, Russia, Italy and Great Britain landed troops on the island in a sort of peacekeeping mission. This resulted in a Greek-led autonomous state within the Ottoman Empire. It was a fudge that lasted about 10 years until a war between the two nations really did erupt. He then served in the Boer War in South Africa, where he was promoted to the rank of brevet major. In 1902 he was dispatched to British Somaliland to help deal with an ongoing Dervish revolt led by Sayyid Mohammed Abdullah Hassan, known colloquially in the British press as the Mad Mullah. On the 22nd of April 1903, a column led by Gough came under surprise attack from the Dervish army. Gough conducted a fighting withdrawal, but suddenly saw two of his officers, Captains William Walker and George Rowland, struggling to rescue a third officer who, badly wounded, had fallen behind. With the Somali warriors racing in for the kill, Gough now rode back and assisted his fellow officers before the rescuers became the victims. Unfortunately, the injured officer was actually killed by a Dervish bullet just as he was lifted onto a camel. Despite the loss of the officer, Gough was so impressed by the bravery shown that he successfully recommended for both Walker and Rowland to receive the Victoria Cross. As for his own action in riding back to rescue all three men from peril, he simply kept quiet. It was only later that his own bravery was brought to the attention of the commander of the Somaliland Field Force. The commander's recommendation that Gough also receive the Victoria Cross was approved, and John received his VC from King Edward VII at Buckingham Palace in 1904. Shortly before the First World War, John Gough was caught up in a moment which threatened to bring the British Army to the brink of mutiny: the Curragh incident. The British government had started to pursue plans to grant home rule to Ireland, but the Protestants in the north armed themselves to resist. When in response the government threatened to use the army should the Protestants start a civil war, 100 British Army officers based at the Curragh camp just outside Dublin threatened to resign. The British Army in Ireland was on the verge of mutiny. And one of their leading members was Johnny Gough VC's brother, Brigadier-General Hugh Gough. John Gough was rapidly sent to Dublin to talk to his brother, and then he accompanied Hubert back to London for a meeting with his superiors and representatives of the government. The result of that meeting was that the government climbed down, stating that the army wouldn't be used against the Protestants after all. The potential mutiny within the army was averted, which was just as well, because 4 months later the First World War broke out. John Gough, now a Brigadier General himself, accompanied the British Expeditionary Force to France as Chief of Staff to Douglas Haig. On the 20th of February 1915, he went to visit his old regiment, the Rifle Brigade, on the front line. As he toured the trenches, he was hit by a chance ricochet from a single shot fired from the German lines. Struck in the abdomen, Brigadier General John Gough VC died 2 days later. The Goughs are one of many families who, over successive generations, have served their country. And I know that many of you can tell similar stories from your own family, including your own military service. And that isn't just unique to my UK viewers either. Many of you have contacted me from the USA, Australia, Canada, India and elsewhere, telling me your family stories. And by the way, I love reading your comments, so please share your particular family histories or thoughts about future talks with me below. But with 3 Victoria Crosses, the Goughs are unique. And Charles and John are one of only 3 father-son VC recipients too. That's a story that's definitely worth remembering and sharing. I'll be telling the stories of the other 2 father-son Victoria Cross holders very soon, so make sure you subscribe to my channel so you don't miss them. And you can get even more stories by joining my supporters club. In this week's members only show, we explored the stories of Leif Robinson VC, the first British person to shoot down a Zeppelin in the First World War, and Oliver Cromwell facing Charles II in the Battle of Worcester. Find out more by clicking on the link in the description. Thanks for your support today. Keep well, and I'll see you again very soon.